Thank you for joining us here on Vital for Colorado Radio. We are part of the Connect and Collaborate Network. I am your on-air producer, Jon Ekstrom. Joining me, as always, our chairman and CEO, Peter Moore.
John, thanks a lot. We have fun doing this. I guess we've done this close to 70 hours of radio over the last several years. Very, very happy to do that. But we have a real radio person, I think over 26 years of experience. Mayor Scott James, mayor of Johnstown, Colorado. Scott, how you doing?
I'm very well, Peter. You just made me 10 years younger. I've been doing this for 36 years, but if you want to think I'm 45 and not 55, I'll let you think that.
Well, you're a 45-year-old today. How about that?
Well, maybe it's like Sammy Hagar. Maybe you can't drive 55.
I can't be that age. So today I'm 45, and that feels pretty good.
I love it. That's fantastic. Well, Scott, we've got a number of things on the docket to talk about today, but I think one of the things we'd like to talk about is you are a Northern Colorado native. You've served the community there in a number of ways. Can you give us a brief bio and some background about who you are and where you come from?
Boy, just as brief as I can. I grew up working on the farms and ranches around LaSalle, Colorado, which was where I was reared. So I'm a Weld County native and then a LaSalle, Colorado native. And in fact, my great grandfather was the second mayor of LaSalle and helped found the community. So that's how far back we go in Colorado. I'm a fourth generation native, and I grew up working on farms and ranches, went out to Northeastern Junior College where I thought I was going to be an ag teacher and teach farm kids how to be farm kids. And I just kind of fell into the radio business out there, and that was going on 37 years ago now, and have just been thoroughly blessed to fall into a business where I get to use the skill set that I think the good Lord gave me. You know, the people get into my business for a couple of different reasons. Some of them just absolutely love radio and music, and some of them weren't hugged by their mother enough. And then there's the folks like me who kind of fell into it because I realized that radio stations give me the unique ability to serve a community. We get to be actively involved in multiple different nonprofit organizations and in community efforts and endeavors, and I've truly loved doing that. So public service via elected office just kind of made sense to me. And so I fell into a planning and zoning role here about 19 years ago, was elected to council 16 years ago, was elected to mayor 2 years ago, and have been serving my community all along.
Wow. That's a remarkable story, and it's funny. I got into radio in college, so I went to Colorado State, and was dissatisfied with what I heard on the radio, so I wanted to create a program that I wanted to listen to. You mentioned you sort of fell into radio, and you mentioned the three sort of buckets. The people who are there for attention, the people who love music, and then you wanted to serve your community. But how did you get into it initially?
And here's literally how it worked. My roommate at Northeastern Junior College had a part-time job at a radio station. And it was a Saturday night, and he had to work the 6 to midnight shift, and he was bummed that he couldn't go out and drink 3-2 beer with his buddies and invited me to go along with him. I went along with him, and I absolutely fell in love. With me, at base, I guess I'm kind of a tech guy. So I fell in love with the control room and knobs and buzzers and all the stuff that exists in a control room, and I decided, boy, I got to do that. And so I talked his boss into giving me a job, and that, like I said, that was nearly 37 years ago. And I've always told myself that if I couldn't pay the bills or if I stopped having fun, I'd get out of the business. And I've always just thoroughly enjoyed myself, and always somehow been able to pay the bills. So I've stayed doing what I do.
Wow, and in the same region, which is unique sort of in the radio space, because you hear a lot about people who work in media end up having to move all over the country. I know when I was at my campus student media, some of the folks in our TV station would end up doing the sports report in like Idaho. And they'd bounce all over the country, but you were able to stay in the place that you love. And I mean, that gives you deep roots, and that's unique in today's media landscape.
Well, there's even a little deeper story to it than that. I decided rather than transferring to Colorado State University like all good ag majors, I was going to chase fame and fortune. And so I did move. I moved from Sterling to Great Bend, Kansas, which, boy, I thought that was a move up. But then I bounced down into Texas. I was in Amarillo, Austin, San Antonio, where I spent some radio time. And literally, it was the fall of 1990. My contract was up in San Antonio. and I had to come home for a buddy's wedding, and I didn't feel right about signing another 4-year deal in San Antonio, and things fell into place, and so I came home. I've been on the air in northern Colorado, in the region where I grew up, since 1990, though, since the fall of 90. So I've got deep roots in northern Colorado for sure.
And Scott, I think along the way you've been recognized by the Colorado Broadcasters Association for some pretty stunning awards. Best morning show, best news talk personality, best station entertainment personality. That's a lot of pure recognition.
Well, the CBA has been kind to me, and it's an honor to be recognized by your fellow broadcasters as somebody that they hold in high esteem, and so it was a treat to win those. But I think probably my biggest pleasure to this day is just sitting behind a microphone, knowing I might be able to draw a smile and being able to be there for a community when they need you. You know, I hearken back to some things in northern Colorado, to the fires here from 5 or 6 years ago where people needed help. From the floods of 2013, we swung into action and helped people out there. And so we've helped people both locally and nationwide. And so radio to me has just been a community treat, and it's what I love to do.
For those that are listening, could you maybe give us a quick profile of the town of Johnstown? I'm not sure the current population, but I think of it as somewhere around 15,000 to 18,000 people, about 50 miles north of Denver.
Yep,
a little bit southwest of Greeley.
You know, we're not that far. Everything in Colorado, if you notice anymore, it's no longer in a delineation of miles. It's in a delineation of minutes.
Right.
And so, from my house in Johnstown, I can be down to a third baseline seat in Coors Field in about 35 minutes. So we're not that far north of Johnstown. We're right off the interstate. We are just recently passed north of 16,000 people. My wife and I ironically moved to Johnstown on April Fool's Day of 1998. And at that time, we were about 3,200 persons. Today, we're just a little bit north of 16,000. We are the most rapid growing community in Weld County. I'm very proud of the work that we have done. And by the way, we're both Weld and Larimer counties. We're a dual county municipality. Very proud of the work that we've done. When I sat down on the council seat in 2002, we had $9 million in reserves, about $13 million in debt. Today, we are one of 2 debt-free municipalities in the state of Colorado. We have $81 million in reserves. We're currently in the process of building a $36 million recreation center, and we'll write a check for it. We'll pay cash for it. So Johnstown's a conservative, fiscally responsible little community, and we're just filled with great middle-class people. They say there's a diminishing middle class, not in Johnstown. They've come to live in Johnstown. I'm very proud of my community.
Love those words, debt-free. I'm going to pay for a community center by writing a check. That is truly unique in today's world.
You know, it's good old-fashioned managing your money. We've decided to live like what most of our residents have to live, within our means, and then saving for the future. And since I have been on the council in those 16 years, we have built a police center, or a police station rather, a library, a public works facility, a town hall, and they have all been without public debt. And currently we're building that rec center, and that will be paid for in cash as well.
Well, it situates you nicely inside Weld County, which is one of the few debt-free counties in the entire country. And so that philosophy matches up nicely. One thing I'm curious about is, given that your municipality falls within 2 different counties, how does that impact the way that you run the city?
You know, it doesn't have a huge impact. I mean, there's just a couple of different regulations when we deal with Larimer, and then it is when we deal with Weld. Obviously, the bulk of Johnstown is in Weld County, but what is our kind of economic and most rapid growing part is in Larimer County at I-25 and 34. The Shields All Sports Store has built there. We have a development called 2534, which is 1.2 million square foot. It built out of retail, of commercial, of very light industrial, of office space, and it is truly put Johnstown on the map from a retail and commercial standpoint. It's interesting in the fact that we have attracted some world-class businesses to 2534, and they don't care that they're in a small town. They like the location. And so our municipality is tasked with providing the same kind of constituent and business service that, say, a Denver or an Aurora or a Colorado Springs would have to provide. We provide that in our little municipality, and by the way, we do so without debt. So I'm proud of that.
It sounds like the sales taxes from that commercial base probably contributed very greatly to the debt-free situation that you now have.
Peter, who's counting? We have been very blessed with a rich retail sales tax base, with a residential tax base, and now we're working on that primary sector employment as well.
Well, the point that makes to me is that how interdependent we are on all the businesses and all the small businesses. There are some national companies there, but there are many franchisees and smaller businesses, and I think they all need to work together in order to keep a vibrant community like Johnstown going.
You know, Peter, I one of the things, and we can merge into a conversation if you'd like about Proposition 112. One of the things that just scares me to death about 112 is how interdependent the folks, especially in Weld County, and especially the small businesses, have grown with the oil and gas industry, in the fact that, you know, I'll point out a little company called Black Sheep Eatery. It is a little kind of gift shop and coffee shop, and you can get you a craft beer at night, and they have light food, and it's a good place to go and just meet and have a cup of coffee and be with your community. It's opened on the main street of Johnstown, on Parrish Avenue. It truly is a unique family-run business. And you see the guys go in there every morning and get them a little breakfast and get them a cup of coffee, and they're wearing their flame retardant clothing, and they got their boots on, and their pickups are parked out front. And it is the owners of this business acknowledge that they wouldn't have been able to open if it wouldn't have been for the blessing that the oil and gas worker has been to Johnstown. And I'm fearful that will dry up and blow away if 112 passes.
John, why don't you set this up a little bit just to explain to folks who may not understand what's coming up in the election on February 4. So
Proposition 112 is a statutory measure that would increase the existing oil and gas setback from 500 feet from a single occupancy structure, or 1,000 feet from a high occupancy structure, up to 2,500 feet. Now, that's not just from structures, that is from waterways, that is from parks, that is from areas of special concern which have not been defined yet. They can be defined later by a local government or by the state, which would, in effect, render 85% of state and private lands off limits to new oil and gas development. So Vital for Colorado has taken an official no position on Proposition 112, and with good reason. One of the studies that we cite was conducted by the Common Sense Policy Roundtable, using the REMI model, which, Peter, you're familiar with the REMI model.
Yeah.
It's widely acclaimed. It has national credibility. And they have determined that in the first year, there would be 47,000 jobs lost as a result of Proposition 112. Between now and 2030, about 150,000 jobs. And 77%, based on their analysis, 77% would come from outside the oil and gas industry. Because if you can't develop inventory, if you cannot cite new projects, which 85% of the state would now be off limits to that, you're just going to go somewhere else. So the chances of jobs within the energy sector of being relocated, granted you lift them out of the Colorado economy, but those jobs go elsewhere. What we're describing here, and Scott, what I think you articulated nicely, is that the impact to oil and gas to local businesses is much more profound than people realize, and you articulated that really well with respect to Black Sheep Coffee House. And can you give us a snapshot of sort of what do the demographics look like in Johnstown in terms of the oil and gas industry versus people who visit Johnstown on their way to the oil patch?
You know, I can't provide specific numbers, John, but I can certainly tell you. I certainly tell you what I live around. I live in the quintessential middle-class neighborhood. I live in a little neighborhood called Pioneer Ridge. It was developed by Ryland and by U.S. Homes back in the day, by some Richmond housing in there. It's 893 homes in my lone Pioneer Ridge subdivision, and I can tell you that about every third to fourth house is some way directly employed by oil and gas. Plenty of white pickups in our neighborhood, And these kids, they go to school. With my kid at the schools, it directly affects the evaluation of RE5J school district, which is a Johnstown Milliken school district. 55% of RE5J's evaluation is oil and gas, which is low compared to some of those communities. For example, Kersey, I believe, is north of 90% of the valuation of their school district is from oil and gas properties. And so it's just integrated into the way of life. A lot of people say you drive to qualify, and I think that's somewhat true. And the fact that you look at Fort Collins and Greeley and Loveland and the cities in northern Colorado, they're a bit more expensive to live in. So these guys get them a good old-fashioned middle-class job in the oil patch, and they come and they contribute to a community. And as mayor, I couldn't be prouder of what Johnstown is and what it represents, because it represents hard work. It represents guys getting up in the morning and going doing their job and coming home and being with their families. And because of their economic impact on the community, things like Black Sheep Eatery, like Santiago's Mexican food restaurant, like Nacho y Kiki's. We have 3 different Mexican food restaurants right within about a block radius of each other in Johnstown. I encourage you to come sometime.
I can't wait.
And right now, you can't get a table. You can't get a table because these guys are so prosperous in doing what they're doing. It so richly economically impacts and culturally impacts my community. We could not replace the devastation that 112 would wreak if it passes. I don't even want to think about being mayor of a municipality where all of a sudden the property values plummet and where the businesses start becoming emptier and where these guys are looking for work. I can't bear to think of it because and I would continue to be proud of my community, and certainly people would rebound. But it would be incredibly difficult to replace that impact that the oil and gas industry has on Johnstown.
Well, you don't want to put your community in a hole, is essentially what you're saying, and unnecessarily so, because a lot of what Proposition 112 is it's being positioned as health and safety versus the economy. Now, in our estimation, based on the analysis that we've read from the COGCC and the CDPHE and others, this would not actually improve health and safety outcomes. And so it's not a question of either or. We believe that we can have both and that we have had both. And what you're describing in Johnstown is very much that. You are, sort of on the edge of the oil patch. Is there development in Johnstown proper?
Yes, we've had oil and gas developments in Johnstown on properties that are annexed into Johnstown. And I got to tell you, the exploration companies in northern Colorado and have been incredible in working with us. And folks, when they talk about this 2,500-foot setback, first of all, it's a number they pulled out of thin air. Secondly, it is a number that I, as a guy who's in charge of a municipal land use policy governing board in the town council, we have the ability to say, hey, Anadarko, hey, Extraction, hey, SRC, this well that you want to build, we believe that's just a little too close to that neighborhood or that school. And so rather than going 500 foot, will you work with us on 1,000 foot? And when we've said that, they have been absolutely 100% yes compliant. But when you do that 2,500-foot number, it takes the power of that give and take, of that negotiate. It takes the power of that planning process away from the people that are closest to you and puts it into the folks under the Gold Dome. And quite frankly, I would suggest that you trust your mayor and your town council more than you do those folks under that Gold Dome, because it truly is the best government is the government that's closest to home. And if this thing were to pass, our hands are tied. We cannot work with those exploration companies anymore.
That's actually a great point. I'm seeing the evolution of various arguments. I want to get into a few points that John made, but just in terms of local control, that's been a hallmark of people that would like to wrest local control back from the state. But here, because of this artificial number, is actually taking local control away, and it's actually taking the control for siting that you just described.
Well, and Mr. Mayor, it certainly runs contrary to the narrative that you hear where oil and gas companies come in and steamroll local elected officials or steamroll the local community. What you're describing runs very contrary to that. Do you ever get resistance to that? Do people not believe you when you tell them that?
Of course they don't believe me because immediately they wonder, well, geez, whose pocket is he in? No one's. I represent the citizens of the town of Johnstown. And I can tell you that there are no people more respectful, no people more compliant, no people more willing to work with and be a good neighbor than are the folks from the oil and gas industry. I can tell you I've received more grief than somebody who wanted to develop a convenience store than somebody who wants to develop the mineral rights on a given property. They are professional, they know what they're doing, and they are completely respective of local governments.
Well, Mayor James, I think you've actually taken this message to other mayors in your area. Can you tell us about mayors against Proposition 112?
Yeah, and how that developed.
You know, it's interesting in the fact that we've already discussed it. I'm just a radio guy, but I have a sign sitting in my front yard, like many signs that are out there this election cycle, that says "I am Colorado Oil and Gas," because I can tell you that my radio stations are at record billing this year because our advertisers want to reach the money and they want to reach the people that are rich in northern Colorado right now. So in a roundabout way, my industry is impacted by the health of the oil and gas industry in the state of Colorado, and all, for that matter, all industries are. And so one day I'm mowing my lawn, literally, and I'm moving this sign that says "I am Colorado Oil and Gas," and I'm getting angry as I push my lawnmower, by the way, propelled by fossil fuels, as I push my lawnmower up and down across this grass, and I'm thinking to myself, I've been given a voice and I've been given a constituency that it's my job to lead and to look over, and if 112 passes, it is detrimental to the citizens that I'm paid to have their back when it comes to their best interest. And I got angry thinking about out-of-state interest coming into the state of Colorado and trying to pass this particular issue that, again, the 2,500-foot number is out of thin air. And they wanted to exert out-of-state influence on the will of the people who live in Johnstown, and it made me think it's unacceptable. So I sat down after my lawn's done, and I light my cigar, which, by the way, I use fossil fuel to do that. And I called my buddy John Gates, who is the mayor of the city of Greeley, and I said, "John, we got to lift our voices. Are you an advocate?" "No, I'm not an advocate. Neither one of us have ever been activists, but we are mayors and we have a voice. Let's try to lift those voices and bring attention to the devastation that 112 will have on local municipalities." And so we decided to call a couple other Weld County mayors. Kevin Ross in Eaton got on board, Bo Woodcock in Milliken, Christy Melendez in Windsor, Andy Martinez in LaSalle, Brian Rudy in Evans. A bunch of Weld County mayors just immediately got on board, and we said, absolutely. And so we had, for my first activist event, I've never been an activist, we stood on the courthouse steps of Weld County in front of about 300 people who gathered to say 112 is bad. And so that was our first event. You know, it's funny, a couple of days after we had that event, Mayor Wade Troxel, who is a longtime friend and who is mayor of the city of Fort Collins, called and said, he was a little pouty. He said, "Scott, does it have to be just Weld County mayors?" And I said, "No, Mayor Troxel, if you want to represent Fort Collins and say I'm against this, you can." So Mayor Troxel signed on board. And the next thing I know, Denver Mayor Michael Hancock. And the next thing I know, former Mayor Wellington Webb is on board. And the next thing I know, Bob Lagar, who is the mayor of Aurora, and John Suthers, mayor of Colorado Springs. And fast forward to today, 52 mayors from all four corners of the state have signed on to be a member of Mayors Against Prop 112 and saying this 112 is bad for our municipalities, it's bad for Colorado.
Well, and what you're describing extends well beyond, I mean, Weld County, that makes sense to me. That's sort of intuitive. You know,
Ground zero.
Absolutely, it's ground zero. But the fact that this has rippled out to places like Fort Collins, where in 2013 they were considering a moratorium, all the way down to Colorado Springs, which doesn't have direct oil and gas activity, but they do have manufacturing that is reliant on cheap natural gas and cheap fossil fuels to maintain the robustness of their economy. And Denver Mayor Michael Hancock. You know, this is not an exclusively Republican thing. This is bipartisan. This is people who lead the state saying, you know what, this is not the way to run a railroad.
You know, I'm a native, so I grew up understanding some of the political figures in Colorado. And when they contacted me and said and told me that former Mayor Wellington Webb wanted to be involved, I was a little starstruck, thinking, I've watched this guy. He's had a rich career. He and I agree on about nothing. But we stood on the state capitol steps on one day, and Mayor Wellington Webb and I, who are on opposite ends of the ideological spectrum, agreed on one thing. We agreed on the fact that 112 is bad.
Well, fantastic. We're going to get into more about Proposition 112 here in our next next segment. If you're interested in hearing this show in its entirety, you can go to vitalforcolorado.com, go to the Learn tab. It's under Radio and Podcasts. You'll find a link to this show as well as the other almost 70 hours of radio that we have with leaders from all across the state. Scott James is our guest. He is the mayor of Johnstown. Peter Moore is our host. He's the chairman and CEO, and we will be back just here in a second. Thank you for staying with us here on Vital for Colorado Radio. Once again, I'm your on-air producer, Jon Ekstrom. With me, as always, is the chairman and CEO of Vital, Peter Moore. He is also an attorney at Robinson, Waters, and O'Dorsio.
Thanks a lot, John. Mayor, I think we'd like to just pick up on the point you just made about the 52 mayors that in this coalition of Mayors Against 112. And I don't know, geographically and politically, I think you can probably think of former Mayor Wellington Webb and Mayor John Suthers, and you, and Mayor Troxel up in Fort Collins. That really is kind of a stunning coalition if you think about it. And
what other kind of issue would that diverse a group come together on?
And they're just all across the they're all across the political spectrum. So those people that would say that just don't believe you as an individual and say, whose pocket are you in? How could they possibly say that with regard to all of these mayors with this great diversity?
You know, those mayors that have gotten on board that I know might think a little bit different from an ideological standpoint than I do. I have ultimate respect for them because, you know, let's be honest. If we're going to talk politics, I'm a conservative guy. I'm a member of a given party, and so you would expect it to come from a conservative Weld County mayor, but to see it come from a mayor like Wellington Webb or from Michael Hancock, Ken Giray from Manitou Springs called me, and I'm telling you, Manitou Springs has absolutely nothing to do with the oil and gas business, but Manitou Springs is a tourist town. And I think Mayor Ken from Manitou Springs pretty quickly recognized it. Boy, I want to sign on and be a part of this. I may not, from a personal standpoint, you know, he might be on the complete different ideological spectrum than what I am, but he immediately recognized how it would affect the tourism-based businesses that exist in his town. So I admire the people who might lean to the left on this conversation because they're the ones that truly have the honesty of thought to say, while I may not necessarily agree with it from an environmental standpoint, I have to agree with it from an economic standpoint. I have to agree with it from the standpoint of the impact that it has on the state of Colorado. And they're the ones that truly took the courage to step forward and say, I'm against this.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I think about a conversation I had with Mayor of Centennial, Stephanie Pico, and she said, we don't like the implication that this has for our home rule charter. Because to a point you articulated in our last segment, this removes local land use decisions from the government that is closest to the people and places it under state control, which is potentially a dangerous precedent. If you're doing it for this industry, what else could come next?
Yeah, exactly, and that's frightening. And you just as well dissolve local councils because one of the most fundamental things that we do is help plan for and shape our communities, and we do that via zoning. We do that via land use planning. And if you take this element of land use planning away from that local organization, then what are you going to take next? And to me, there's nobody that knows better in this constitutional republic than your duly elected council or board of trustees or whatever it may be that you have in your municipality. Nobody that knows better because they're the ones that live every day amongst the folks who they represent. I laugh with my friend, with Congressman Ken Bach, about how he has the ability to disappear to Washington, D.C. I'm liable to be shopping in the same shopping store, in the same grocery store, or the same clothing store with one of my constituents. I call it nose punch politics because if they don't like what I did, they just might punch me in the nose.
Well, they might see you at Black Sheep, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I'll get dressed up and down right there. And so trust me, I have the pulse of the citizen in Johnstown, and so when it comes to land use decisions, I can make those decisions on the behalf of the people that I represent because I know my municipality well, far better than some out-of-state radical environmental interest who, again, arbitrarily chose a 2,500-foot number.
Well, the 2,500-foot number, which ends up being a 5,000-foot wide circle, and they all interlapped, and they all add together to remove, according to the state of Colorado.
Which, by the way, a 5,000-foot diameter circle. That's what, about 450 acres?
Right, but they all overlap, and then there's a map. We can't show it on the radio, but I'll describe it. It's all the private land, and all the red are the areas where future development cannot occur if this were to pass. And I think the number is 85% statewide. And then in counties like Weld County, I think the number is over 90%.
Right.
And
then, it's over 90. And
then any business that can't use their inventory will have to leave. And the devastation almost can't be measured. I think you mentioned that every third or four homes in your community are people directly associated with the oil and gas industry, and eventually they won't have jobs, and eventually they'll leave, and it's just devastating for every single person.
Well, and to reiterate something you said, Mr. Mayor, 55% of the valuation for REJ School District is due to oil and gas. Now, in the event Proposition 112 were to pass, what does that do to your school district in a tangible way? What are some of the real-world impacts that would occur to your school district?
There's a big conversation right now in the RE5J school district about whether they're going to build a new high school. They are right at capacity. I mean, they're right at their capacity number right now. They know they have to expand their high school. They know they have to improve their facilities. That conversation completely goes away. We can't even talk about capital expenditures, and then we have to talk about ongoing expense. They have to take a look at, are we going to cut a school resource officer? Are we going to cut a couple of teachers? Are we going to cut a school health official? They truly have to get down into not a planning for growth, but in a cutting mode. And that directly affects, the neighborhood elementary that my son went to school at, that's 100 yards from my house. That elementary school could be down 4 or 5 teachers simply because of the effects of Proposition 112 passing. So it's frightening.
Wow.
It's very frightening since our future is totally dependent upon educating our young people.
Right, and on a statewide basis, I think something like $839 million statewide is the oil and gas contribution. Now, given that education funding is always a very contentious issue, there's a ballot measure this year for it's Amendment 73 that would address education funding. Vital has not taken a position on that. But given that it is top of mind for people, I would say that as we are considering the ways in which we fund our schools, taking away $839 million on a statewide basis is no one's idea of the best way of doing this.
I agree. It's interesting in the fact that in a recent rally held on the state capitol steps, the state representative Joe Salazar spoke about how he felt that the oil and gas industry was immoral. I believe the word he used was immoral. I couldn't disagree more. I think it's, in fact, a very moral issue. But I do agree with him in the fact that Proposition 112 is an issue of morality. Where is the morality in denying that private property owner the right to develop their property? Heck, that's what this nation was built on, is the very concept of property and how that property owner has ultimate rights with what he or she wants to do with their land and with the mineral and water rights that are associated with that property. So we hear so much from those who are in favor of 112 about how this is for health and safety and about how, oh my God, we're enriching big oil and gas. No, let's talk about the property right that you're robbing from that individual who has farmed that same piece of ground forever. He has not made 2 nickels to rub together on the commodity that is corn, but he does have that oil and gas right that is his to develop, and that's how he and his wife are going to retire. You talk to me about immorality. Denying that property owner their right is immoral.
Well, that's right. And people say, well, the oil and gas companies can just drill down the road, but the rancher and the farmer can't move their land down the road. And this is absolutely essential money, which is why on our board we have the Colorado Farm Bureau as one of our very strong coalition members, and they're pushing on that. And maybe just end on 112. The language I like to use is that it's a ban. It's a ban of an industry for no good reason. people say it's for health, safety, and welfare, but the Colorado Department of Health has issued a report and has found no relationship between one and the other. And so it's a ban of an industry, a $31 billion vertical. I think ultimately over time, hundreds of thousands of jobs. I think that it'll put the state not in a recession, but in a depression for no good reason. And to get back to your point about morality, I've never heard of the idea of banning an industry, especially when there are no facts and science, but an awful lot of fear. And the fear is funded, if people question it, it's funded by outside interests who have stated that what they want to do is to change the United States from a petroleum-based economy to something else. And there is not the technology, and it can't be done. But
not on a dime like that.
But these folks want to do it, and they want to do it in Colorado, and they want to do it now, and the vote comes up in 6 days. It's kind of a scary thing. I don't know, Mayor, if I've overstated things, but that's the way that I look at it. It's so dangerous.
You know, it's interesting. I can compare things to my business, to the radio business. My company is rapidly investing in podcast, in different types of audio entertainment, because we know that the radio business, it may be a buggy whip business. I don't think it'll ever completely go away, but consumers are certainly changing their tastes. So you could say that the number one investor in new media is traditional media. So who do you think is going to be the number one investor in renewable energies and new energies than the traditional energy business? I think that the people in the oil and gas industry are the biggest investors. So if this very company that wants to ban oil and gas development in the state of Colorado truly wants a renewable future, well, who better to invest in it, the very people that they want to ban?
I think I think you're dead on in that, and I think about what I've seen from the majors investing in this, and my suspicion is if this were ready for prime time, I mean, Colorado is one of the leaders in the nation in terms of installed wind and installed solar. We're getting there. One of the reasons is natural gas serves as a backup. And that is one of Vital's principles. I believe it's principle number 5. We believe in all of the above, and particularly that natural gas actually emboldens a renewable future. The reason is the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. We don't have battery technology able to accommodate those resources when they are producing in overabundance or when they are deficient during peak demand. Natural gas is there as a backup. So they work hand in glove. A lot of people want to put them in opposition to one another, one against the other, fossil fuels versus renewables, when in reality, they actually work quite nicely together. And I think that speaks to your point.
Well, you know, the second that the automobile was invented, we didn't stable all our horses. Now, did we? It was a merging between transportation mechanisms. It will be the same way with energy.
Well, let's switch to another potentially contentious issue: transportation. We don't have enough money. The roads need to be fixed. The bridges need to be fixed even more significantly. Some of the roads are dangerous. They don't have sidebars, and there's a clear difference. If you travel across the street, you can see from the eastern slope and the western slope, the roads on the eastern slope a little bit better. There are two propositions, and I think the first one, 109, is prosaically called Fix Our Damn Roads, I think, right? And then there's Proposition 110, which is endorsed by the Denver Post and by many civic organizations. Where do you sit on that debate between those two propositions?
I think it's interesting that they come up at the same time. I am certainly a proponent of Proposition 109, and I'm not necessarily an opponent of Proposition 110. It is a tax increase, and I would rather first hold our legislators accountable to properly distributing funds into one of the basic functions of government, which is transportation. So I'm not saying they're mutually exclusive. It's can we try step 1, which I believe is 109, and then if and when needed, step 2, which is 110. Now, again, there's no argument that we need to invest in our infrastructure in the state of Colorado. And even I, as somebody who is ideologically come across as conservative, if ever there is the justification of an increase in a tax, it would be so for our transportation. But I would like to first challenge our legislatures to truly set priorities before we give them an additional taxation authority. But again, as normally a guy that would be vehemently pounding on the table against taxes, we have funded our transportation system based on a regressive tax. And the higher the feds drive the CAFE standards, the lower the income it is that we have on the gas tax. And that's about all we have in the state of Colorado is that Highway Users Fund, which is funded by the gas tax, and that is a regressive, diminishing tax.
Well, one thing that is interesting to me is you noted Johnstown is the fastest growing community in Weld County, and northern Colorado is feeling a transportation crunch. I know that Weld County recently completed the Kersey Highway. Help me
County
here.
Road 49.
Yep, 49. And I know that they paid for that in cash as well. What are the transportation challenges you are seeing in and around your community?
It's interesting in the fact that northern Colorado is such a fascinating, integrated region. It is a standalone economy. I mean, people think about, and we speak of municipalities in Fort Collins, Greeley, and Loveland, and my municipality in Johnstown, and certainly I am mayor of Johnstown, and I represent those people. But I'm a fool to believe that Johnstown operates as an island unto itself. In fact, it's just a part of a very richly dynamic region that is northern Colorado. So, for example, I live in Johnstown, and I work in Loveland, and I teach a couple of classes over at Ames Community College in Greeley. I run up and down the highways and move around on the roads, and I could be in Greeley, Fort Collins, Johnstown, Loveland, Windsor on any given day of the week. In fact, that's kind of what my day looks like a little bit later today as I travel around northern Colorado. In Johnstown, I can say, we've done a great job of funding our roads. But it's not just Johnstown operating as an island unto itself. People hop on those regional county roads, those state highways, those federal highways, and they move around. So while each municipality may be looking out for itself, we're ignoring the fact that we have a rather major impact on the transportation infrastructure that exists between our two communities. Now more than ever, Johnstown needs to talk to Frederick and Firestone and Meade and Billiken and Windsor and Greeley and Loveland and Fort Collins about how we can regionally collaborate on transportation.
Interesting. That's well, I saw on the Johnstown website that you have there's a new express lane coming on I-25 going in soon. What kind of impact will that have?
That will have, and there's a lot of people that immediately naysay it because, well, geez, that managed lane is a quote unquote toll lane. But trust me, it will relieve the congestion on I-25 by, in my opinion, 1/3. And folks who need a predictable, reliable trip to where they're going can take those managed lanes. And in a true capitalist society, we pay for what we use. Trust me, there are times when I'm on such a time crunch, I will hop over into that managed lane and gladly pay the toll because I will need to get where I'm going predictably and reliably, and that's what those managed lanes are about. Johnstown got into a collaboration with the city of Loveland, with Weld County, and with Larimer County to pony up money for the improvements of 402 and the 402 interchange and the 34 interchange onto I-25. Johnstown taxpayers have $6 million skin in a federal transportation game. We took that money out of our general fund, and as you heard me earlier gloat about how we are debt-free, we're very proud of our financial conservatism, our financial responsibility in Johnstown. We took $8 million of our taxpayers' money and put it on a federal roadway because we believe that ardently in the regional cooperation of improving federal highways. We got skin in the game, and Johnstown residents are ready for a transportation fix.
Just curious, do you have a sense of what the percentage of that $6 to $8 million was of the total project cost?
The project cost us $327 million, and they were able to stretch it a little bit farther. Johnny Olson, who is a Region 4 director of CDOT, was able to find some monies. He works the budget magic that he does and juggled things around. So, that $8 million is whatever percentage of the $327 million total project costs. exists. But for, you look at things on a per capita basis, which you can't do in transportation, but still I'm paid and elected to represent the folks in the town of Johnstown. Our 16,000 people with their $8 million has a per capita number in the game that's probably higher than anybody else in the region. But we're proud to do that because we are solely reliant on, especially on I-25, but on the other regional roadways as well.
Certainly. Well, we've only got about 3 minutes left here. What other issues should people be aware of as it pertains to either Johnstown or Weld County or northern Colorado? Anything you want to call attention to? Anything you want to call out, Mayor?
It's interesting in the fact that there are conversations of 74 and conversations of 73, and I'll leave that to the voters. It's the right of the people to decide there. 112 is certainly the big one, and as you mentioned, the transportation initiatives. It's got to be an interesting world in the fact that I know, nobody knows anything, but I very strongly predicted we'd be willing to bet my son's piggy bank on the fact that one of those will pass. I think voters have realized that we need to do something for our transportation in the state of Colorado. It'll be interesting if they both pass, because I do believe that you'll see roadways improved. I can tell you that when site selectors and major businesses come to look at sites in Johnstown, they immediately are asking the question about, geez, that I-25-34 interchange out there, that looks pretty busy right here at 4:30 in the afternoon. You're going to fix that? I think that if we stimulate our economy by investing in transportation, we'll just simply do nothing but continue to grow.
I actually never thought of that both 109 and 110 might pass. I've always thought of them as being competing and exclusive, but that's an interesting perspective. I haven't thought through what would happen if both pass. I guess that'd be a heck of a public statement that the public wants to fix the roads.
They are not mutually exclusive, that's for sure. They could both pass.
Yeah.
And then CDOT will enjoy acting like Santa Claus. But I think you will see voters in one way, shape, or form certainly fund transportation this fall.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine both of them going down. I certainly don't have access to polling, but I think your sense is correct in that one of them will pass. It will be interesting. I don't know that people have necessarily contemplated if they both pass, but I'm sure there are people out there with their ballot going, hey, transportation, yes on 109. Oh, transportation again, yes on 110. Wow.
Exactly. People are tired of being stuck in traffic.
Yeah, certainly. Well, with our remaining time, Mayor, if you have one message, coming back to Proposition 112, because that has taken the bulk of our conversation, if you have one message to people who may be undecided, who are listening to this, they still have their ballot in front of them, this airs, 5 days before the election, before ballots are done and they are counted, what would be your message?
Only, and you'll know the figure better than I do, John, but is it 32, 33%? Only 30-ish% of the jobs lost will be in the oil and gas industry. It's the teacher, it's the butcher, it's the baker, it's the candlestick maker, it's the people working among us, not necessarily in the oil and gas industry, that will be most adversely affected. Take a look at the research that they've done on health and safety. If this is put forward as a health and safety initiative, and the very people, the Colorado Department of Health and Environment, the very people who are tasked with monitoring health and safety in the state of Colorado say this will have no positive effect on health or safety, why the heck are we doing it? Why punish our economy? Why punish the landowner? Why punish your neighbor by voting yes on this thing? Vote no on 112.
It's a fantastic message, Peter. A message for people on Vital for Colorado. Where can people find more? How can they get involved?
Well, Vital for Colorado has been in operation a little over 4 years, and we now have close to 88,000 people that have signed our pledge. So our coalition has become much larger than we ever hoped it might become. Over 1,000 businesses, and the number that I like is over 180 trade associations, which are almost all the trade associations in the state. If you'd like to find out about our organization, our board of directors, we're all business people. We're not oil and gas people at all.
Vital is not the industry.
We're not the industry. We're trying to be the voice of business for the oil and gas industry, and really for rationality in the oil and gas regulation. Please go to our website, which is www.vitalcolorado.com.
And if you're interested in learning more from this episode, if you'd like to hear it again, go to vitalforcolorado.com. The Learn tab has videos and podcasts. You'll find this episode and every episode. Feel free to get involved there. We're also on social media, Facebook and Twitter. Just search Vital for Colorado. You'll find us there. This was an enormous pleasure. Peter Moore is our chairman and CEO of Vital for Colorado, also an attorney at Robinson Waters and Odorcio. Mayor Scott James, mayor of Johnstown, on-air radio personality, and an all-around great guy. Scott, thank you for joining us here. This was very informative and a huge pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Scott.
My pleasure. Thank you.